Beginning around 18 November 2024, a spate of drone sightings began in the New Jersey area. Since then, it has been a continuous nightly experience to date. They've also been seen in New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Minnesota, California, and even all around the world. The U.S. government feigns ignorance about what they are and who controls them, but at the same time, claims that there's no sign that they are dangerous. A day later, they will deny that there are any strange drones at all, and claim that they are airplanes, stars, authorized drones, or even swamp gas. That last one I just threw in there as a reminder of how most UFO sightings are dismissed. The total lack of involvement from the U.S. military in trying to stop these drones makes it quite clear that they are being operated by maleficent elements within said military. Once the majority of people started believing that way, a new twist was suddenly added to the narrative by targeted surreptitious release. They are experts at psychological warfare, after all. In this newly enhanced scenario, one of the dozens of nuclear weapons that disappeared from Ukraine when the old Soviet Union dissolved over a quarter century ago is somehow making its way back to the United States, and the drones are being sent to sniff it out. Most of the grazing sheeple will easily swallow this newly flavored shite, but it simply won't pass the smell test. After all, why only search at night? Why use drones with an array of energy-sucking lights instead of searching stealthily or with standard running lights? It's like they are designed to draw attention to themselves in all ways possible. In other words, they are designed to cause fear. Why follow people back to their homes, if some reports are to be believed? Why promote the idea of the drones being operated by a foreign government instead of coming up with a clever cover story? Why give President-elect Donald Trump a briefing that seemed to go against their narrative, while knowing that he would likely release information or disinformation to the public? If they really truly were searching for nuclear material, then their detection equipment must be a joke to search the same areas for over a month. The whole thing smells like an intel psyop. There is no logical basis for any of this taking place. And whenever that happens, an event that makes no sense whatsoever, then the event in question is not organic in nature. It has likely been manufactured by the CIA, the FBI, Mossad, the U.S. military, or some other ignominious alphabet agency intelligence organization operating at the behest of the elite oligarchs. The event itself is nothing more than a carrier for the real message that they are busy communicating, a message that includes all the crazy elements comprising said event. They are likely recreating something from the past. To uncover that message, you need to examine the symbolism. Most people are ill-equipped to do that. As I repeatedly reveal in my books, the elite communicate truth to the human herd as if we are deaf and blind, or as if they are a part in another dimension. As such, they utilize our other senses, such as dreams, visions, or paranormal prestidigitation, with their favorite tactic being to get us to live the message. In addition, their messages are always multi-layered or multiplexed, providing multiple streams of data. Most of these messages will usually refer back to a biblical event, because those crafting the message are the chosen. So what are they trying to tell us with these drones? I have analyzed this situation and believe I understand what they are doing. There is both an ancient biblical element and a more recent contemporary element in the message. The biblical element goes back to the opening pages of Genesis and the creation of special creatures on the fifth day. First, let's review two verses from Genesis 1. Verse 20 and verse 21. And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that hath life, and fowl that fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Many of these words represent rather dubious translations from Hebrew. Let's review a few, shall we? The word translated as abundantly, sharatz, means to swarm, while the word translated as creature, sheretz, and clearly related to the other word and merely being a different tense, means teeming or swarming things, like insects. One represents the future, while the other represents the present. Meanwhile, the word translated as water, mayim, might mean water, or it might refer to things that are transitory, or represent danger or violence that might come from a water-like realm. The word translated as half, nefesh, means soul, so hath life means living soul. The word translated as fowl, oph, refers to flying creatures. And in verse 21, the word translated as whales, tanin, means dragon, serpent, or sea monster. So what we were given in the Bible is a polished spin on what it might actually be stating. Most people who read those passages will simply claim that the God of the Old Testament created life in the ocean first, on the fifth day, and life on land on the sixth day. But why span days? And why create things that fly with things that reside in the ocean? It doesn't seem to fit. But what if what we think is happening is not what is actually happening? First of all, as we discover in my books, the number 5, as in the fifth day of creation, refers to the divine middle ground. It's the midpoint between the digital root numbers 1 through 9, and it's the midpoint of the master numbers 11 through 99. The midpoint is the precise definition of creation itself, especially with heaven and the firmament. As a result, anything created on the fifth day would specifically be seen as like the God of the Old Testament. This is why Israel, home of the chosen, was founded on May the 14th, a summed 5-5, the midpoint of the fifth month. Many believe that when Lucifer was kicked out of God the Father's realm, the third part went with it. Since I espouse that the God of the Old Testament is actually Satan, Lucifer, or the devil in my books, it is easy to see why this creature would create its own minions first on the fifth day. The word translated as waters literally states things that are transitory or things that make a crossing or a passing as representing danger or violence. All souls must make a crossing through the dam of heaven to reach this planet. When Lucy's brood of dark souls came through, these are the creatures that swarm, they were given bodies on the fifth day. Some of these were the fowl that were specifically created to be flying creatures that traverse heaven or the firmament, as in spaceships. These aren't the regular birds that fly in the air. These are the big-eyed gray aliens that fly in saucer-shaped craft. And finally, the great whales are actually dragons. How much symbolism exists in the book of Revelation regarding the great dragon? Clearly, what was being created on the fifth day were Satan's minions, its gray alien helpers that look like insects or things that swarm, or more fittingly, things that serve as drones. They were created the day before mankind and most life on earth in order to serve as our caretakers. And so, those passages can be retranslated thus: "Let the dangerous waters bring forth the swarmers with a soul, and the foul insectoids that occupy the firmament heaven above earth. And Satan created the great dragon and the swarmers with the soul, and the foul insectoids, and saw that it was good." That was what allegedly occurred in the first book of the Bible. Now let's go to the last book, Revelation. You need to seriously beware Revelation. As with Genesis, we have been sold a particular narrative via deliberate translation errors. The God of the Old Testament has been painted to be a loving God, while at the same time being the biggest murderer in the Bible. The actions don't match the words we are told. Why not? Revelation is the same way. It was created by Satan's minions to further thoroughly corrupt the teachings of Christ, just like anything written by Paul in the New Testament. It was all designed to mimic Genesis, to create a mirrored bookend, to create the Alpha and the Omega. This is literally stated in Revelation 22:13. "I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last." The goat, the God of the Old Testament, who claimed to be the creator, but who was actually the biggest murderer in the Bible, is supposed to be offset by a peaceful son who just happens to turn out to be an insane and vengeful murderer in the end, just like the creature in Genesis. No, boys and girls, that simply will not happen. Christ will not return, and certainly not in murderous vengeance to save you. He already did that. Plus, doing so would go against everything he taught. If some creature does appear, whether real or holographic, purporting to be Christ and riding a white horse, do not believe it. Do not trust it. Unfortunately, as I explain in my books, Revelation was a creation of the Jews, just like, believe it or not, Christianity itself is a creation of the Jews. They are always seeking to create scapegoats for later sacrifice, who will bear their sins. It's all a mind frack, using the language of Battlestar Galactica. The character in Revelation that everyone thinks must be Jesus certainly does not match with the teacher in the Gospels. It most definitely is not Christ. He taught us to look at the actions of someone to uncover their soul, or lack thereof, to look at the type of fruit the tree bears. Do you want specifics? In Revelation, it speaks of the rider of the white horse in 2 locations, separated by 13 chapters. In chapter 6, the first location, it states, "And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, Come and see. And I saw, and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering, and to conquer." Revelation 6:1. The white horse appears again in Revelation 19. In Revelation 19:9, it talks about the marriage supper of the Lamb. In Revelation 19:10, it speaks of an angel and his brethren believing the testimony of Jesus, thus insinuating the identity of the one who appears next. In Revelation 19:11, heaven opens and the white horse appears, ridden by someone called Faithful and True, that came to judge and make war. This is our first clue that the writer wasn't Jesus. In multiple locations, examples Matthew 7:1, Luke 6:37, John 5:22, John 8:15 and 16, and John 12:47, we find that Christ doesn't judge, and he certainly doesn't make war. In Revelation 19:12 and 13, it describes the writer in more detail. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself, and he was clothed with the vesture dipped in blood. And his name is called the Word of God. Revelation 19:12, 13. Eyes that were a flame of fire with a vesture dipped in blood? That doesn't sound much like Jesus, does it? It sounds a lot like the traditional image of the devil, but definitely not Christ. Likewise, the writer is first described as having the name faithful and true. Then he has a name written that no man knows but himself. And then his name is the Word of God. Again, does this constantly changing persona sound like the honest and true Christ? In Revelation 19:14, armies allegedly follow the rider of the white horse, all riding white horses of their own. Why, pray tell, does an all-powerful God need an army when a single thought could wipe us from existence? In Revelation 19:15, a sharp sword comes out of the mouth of the rider of the white horse, the one purporting to be Jesus. He goes forth to smite the nations and rule with a rod of iron. Again, does this sound like Christ in any way? In Revelation 19:16, another name is given, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This is where it gets interesting. In Revelation 19:17, an angel cries in a loud voice for the fowls of heaven to gather together for the supper of the great God. That ye may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great. And the remnants were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. Revelation 19:18 and verse 21. Who are these fowls of heaven? As I showed you in Genesis 1, they were the fowls created on the fifth day. These are Satan's minions, the watchers, the caretakers, the wardens of prison earth. These are the chosen, those who claim to be racially superior. They will gather together to feast upon mankind in the last days. It specifically mentions the flesh of kings and captains and mighty men. Now think about the CEO of United Healthcare that was killed during all of this drone activity. Kings and captains and mighty men. The day before Thanksgiving, a very rich man named William de Rothschild died in a house fire. Someone who was not a Rothschild, but changed his name to Rothschild, just like the real Rothschilds did hundreds of years ago. Is it just a coincidence? Now ponder the fact that bird flu is allegedly cropping up all over the place. Our waters have been salted, so to speak, by all the chemtrail spraying used to control the weather. They now include whatever is being labeled as bird flu, which has birds dropping from the skies, as was reported on 12 December 2024 occurring in Kansas City. The two instances of the white horse in Revelation refer to two leaders. Revelation 6 refers to George W. Bush after 9/11, while Revelation 19 refers to Donald J. Trump, the two parts leading the two parts to their doom. That was the ancient message. And now, finally, we come to the recent message that explains the drones. Several years ago, I wrote an 800-page book detailing my evidence that we are reliving the events of 1912 to 1945. The book was titled The Great Replay. In it, I provided example after example of events that have already replayed. In fact, my prior book to The Great Replay, released in 2017, showcased one of these elements. At the time, I was only just beginning to understand how everything from those years was actively repeating, but I was confident enough to predict that we would see a global pandemic to mimic the 1918 Spanish flu, among other things, and I even predicted the events would begin around 2020. For once, I was right. In showcasing events that were repeating, I happened across Amelia Earhart and the destruction of the airship Hindenburg, which took place within weeks of each other and which themselves were mirror events. I already knew that Earhart's story was repeated in our days as MH370, and I already worked out that the U.S. government/military/intel organizations had took control of that aircraft. As such, that meant that the government was also behind Earhart's disappearance, because the story must replay as it did before. Well, if the government was behind the disappearance of MH370 and Earhart, and if Earhart's loss was indeed a replay of Hindenburg, then the government was also behind the destruction of Hindenburg as well. But why? As I repeatedly state in my books, if an event makes absolutely no sense, look at the symbolism, because they are giving us a message. What was that message? It's important to first understand that the U.S. was the primary power that beat Germany in both World War I and World War II. In mirror events, the roles must reverse, as does the sequence of events, but the story plays the same. What that means is that, at some point in the future, the U.S. must assume the fate of Germany/Japan in those wars. I don't think it's much of a stretch to see the U.S. behaving as Nazi Germany right now. The U.S. has 750 military bases in 80 countries. Sounds a lot like Nazi Germany, doesn't it? Or, in this case, Ashkenazi Germany. This is the primary reason why the Jews always want someone to do their fighting for them, so others get to deal with the bad juju. What about Hindenburg? The German Zeppelin Hindenburg was approaching Lakehurst, New Jersey, in the early evening of 6 May 1937, when it mysteriously caught fire. It was an airship, very similar to these drones, but a mirror opposite. Hindenburg was the largest, while these drones are the smallest. Anyway, these drone sightings began in New Jersey to harken back to Hindenburg. But that's not the most frightening aspect. I state in my book that the Hindenburg incident must be repeated at some point today. But how can that be, since we don't really have large commercial airships in operation, and certainly not using hydrogen gas. So what could a similar replay entail? As stated, Hindenburg was loaded with highly flammable hydrogen gas, since helium was being kept from Hitler. Essentially, from a purely symbolic standpoint, it was a hydrogen bomb in its own way. Do you see? A hydrogen bomb today is a thermonuclear weapon. In my book, I stated that the detonation of a hydrogen bomb would occur in the coming days. How do we know? Because its echo occurred in the past in the guise of Hindenburg. History cannot be changed. It must happen somewhere. And that, boys and girls, is what I believe the symbolism is behind these drones. Set off a nuclear weapon before Trump takes office. Heck, perhaps to even keep him from taking office. And blame it on some nation state. Start the war so he can't stop it. Whether a nuke is set off before Trump takes office, I honestly can't predict. However, if my analysis of the symbolism of Hindenburg is correct, a nuke will be set off at some point in the coming days. Anyway, I hope that this video has introduced you to some interesting alternative concepts. Naturally, the key takeaway to remember is that the elite always speak to us via symbolism. They speak truth via actions that they themselves manufacture, while simultaneously spewing a cacophony of lies to our face. This is particularly evident when events like COVID, or the Las Vegas shooting, or 9/11, or the onset of these drones, makes no logical sense. It will never make sense until you step back and try to understand the symbolism you are being given. Sadly, in order to make a proper analysis, you must be versed in the Bible and history, and you must begin to see things from a different perspective. And please, don't be looking for prophecy to be satisfied as a sign of God or of Christ returning, because the chosen elite are experts at manufacturing prophetic biblical notions. If you found this interesting, please check out my books. My website is www.mastersofthemirror.com. Thanks.